Ghana's parliament has passed 3 new bills to raise revenue, even as it pursues an IMF bailout for its struggling economy. The bills are the Excise Duty Amendment Bill 2022, the Growth and Sustainability Levy Bill 2022, and the Income Tax Amendment Bill of 2022. Now, these financial bills aim to generate approximately 4 billion Ghana cedis annually for domestic revenue mobilization. Furthermore, they are essential in supporting the government's efforts to obtain board approval for the $3 billion International Monetary Fund Program staff level agreement. But the opposition in the West African country says these new taxes are not justified. They argue that government cannot overburden the public for its own fiscal irresponsibility. The government has justified, however, that the introduction of the taxes are crucial to help recovery from the current economic crisis. My name is Kemini Amano. Let's look into this further. Joining us on the square today are Dr. Joseph Obeng, who's president of the Ghana Union of Traders Association. We also have Professor Lord Mensah. He's a professor at the University of Ghana Business School. And we have Godfred Alufa Bokpin, who is an economist and also a professor of finance at the University of Ghana. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the square.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Dr. Obeng. How is the union processing this recent move by Ghana's parliament?
Yeah, we disapprove the passage of the bill, and even before the passage, we have sent petitions to Parliament, to the Speaker, and also give a pledge to government itself that we are unable to carry out this burden again, because businesses in Ghana are overtaxed. We are extorsively taxed, and we are overburdened to the extent that we cannot bear it again. It is very unfortunate that the Parliament of Ghana did not listen to the pleas of the business community. They represented themselves. They represented their own interest, and then the interest of their party that they belong. And then they passed this bill against us, and we are disappointed and we disapprove. And that's why we have further sent a petition to the president. We are sending it anytime soon for the president not to assent to it. Otherwise, businesses are going to collapse.
I see. We'll come to that in a bit. Let me move the conversation on to Professor Mensah. Professor Mensah, what could be the economic reason for, this move by Ghana's parliament and by extension, the finance ministry?
Yeah, the economic reasons will be that government wants to raise money. Now, anytime we find ourselves with the IMF, the conditions they give us is to raise revenue and then, cut down expenditure. In a way, they're telling you that as a country, you must be self-sufficient to a certain level before they can come in to help you. And so anything that turns out to, affect your, expenditure lines, they try to find a way to reduce it, and then possibly, introduce tax measures that will increase, your revenue generation. Now, if you look at the economic situation in Ghana now, whatever the case may be, it is anticipated that, increase in taxes will be passed on to the consumer. As we speak now, prices are so high to the extent that our inflation is about 50% and above. And you ask yourself, if we want to reduce inflation and we go ahead to pass such a bill, the pass-on effect to the ordinary consumer will turn up that prices are going to go up. Already, a typical Ghanaian has lost 50% of his income as a result of, inflation. So effectively, there is, an economic motive which government wants to raise money. But if you look at the timing as we speak now, definitely it tells you that the timing is wrong. But then even though we needed IMF, program for which, they have given us these conditions to raise money, it's going to be a sacrifice which Ghanaians are, bearing now. But the question is, would there be, a benefit to these sacrifices Ghanaians are going to
make it.
Yes.
That's a question I hope we can look at a little later. But Professor Boakman, let's bring you in now. Should the Ghanaian people have expected this, the very moment that, the nation took the decision to go to the IMF, given its financial history with Bretton Woods body?
Well, I think that I wouldn't say that we were expecting this. I think the question is the optimal approach to increase our tax to GDP ratio. Is the approach that is the issue now. I think Ghanaians largely agree with government, including private sector, that there's the need to increase our domestic revenue mobilization. There's no doubt about that, because we are doing, in terms of tax GDP ratio, we are doing below 14%. The question is the strategy in terms of both policy, compliance, administrative reforms that we need to embark upon to close it. And I think where the disagreement is right now is the method or the approach that government has adopted in closing the revenue gap. And I think that is suboptimal. I think that is where the issue is right now. People disagree, and we disagree with that because if you look at the income tax amendment bill, if you look at the growth and sustainability bill and all of that, it's more or less burdening the faithful few. And also some kind of a backdoor approach to raise more revenue from the few tax-paying population, right? So instead of broadening it, we are rather deepening the tax net as a way of also burdening the faithful few. Meanwhile, if we focus on administrative and compliance, greater compliance through the deployment of digitization, chances are that we could raise more revenue without burdening the faithful few. So it's more of the approach. So what we have seen in Ghana, but you see part of that also in other African countries, is some lazy approach, right, to raising revenue, where you want to burden the faithful few that have been complying over the years, but then instead of roping in or broadening the tax base, because that requires work and effort, that requires patience, and that requires time, government doesn't want to choose that approach. And also, it should not, and it cannot be the case that you can achieve fiscal consolidation objectives consistent to the IMF program merely by increasing revenue. It has to take a combination of revenue enhancement and expenditure restraint. What we have seen in Ghana, and particularly with this government, is that they are raising revenue consistent with their challenges and spending as though we are in the harvest season.
I see. That's very interesting to note, and I'd like you to go in deeper. But let's move on to Dr. Obeng. Now, Dr. Obeng, you talked about how this could impact, your businesses or members of your association. Explain to us what these impacts could be.
Yeah, with the growth and sustainability levy, what it's going to do is that it's going to make us pay multiplicity of taxes. Now, the communication industries, the insurance industries, the banking industry, and then the shipping lines and the rest are all going to have their gross being taxed with 5%. What it means is that they are not going to absorb it. These industries are all going to offload this burden on us, on the end users, the traders, the manufacturers and the farmers at that. And apart from that, that they are going to offload this burden on us, we are also made to also pay 2.5% on our gross profit, which means that it's going to have a cascading effect on businesses, and that's why we call it an obnoxious tax. When you go to the tax excise tax duty, if you are using it for health reasons, and that you are putting this tax on smoking, cigarettes, and then alcohol drinks, then of course we can take it like that. But once it's coming to value-added agro processed fruits like fruit juices, mineral waters, and all that, because it's against Ghana's the government-owned industrialization drive, that people who have added value to these products will have to pay 20% as a punitive tax for producing these ones. And so in every aspect, it's not helping us. Already inflation is over 50%. The consuming public are overburdened, and their purchasing power has reduced drastically. So you cannot also say that, okay, you are taking it and then you offload it to the consuming public. They have limited resources, and they are curtailed by the inflation also. And the business that we do it we thrive on turnover. And if the consuming public are unable to buy the volumes that they used to buy from you, what it means is that you are unable to service your loan, and then your surplus credit.
I see.
What it means that your business will collapse. Let me give you one example.
Right, quickly.
Last quarter of the year 2022 saw most of our businesses' capital being eroded. About 50% of our capitals were eroded, and people are unable even to import much as we used to import. Now, if you go to the Tama port, last week we were called by the administrators at the Tama to confer with business groups like ours. And what they said is that the Tama port is half empty. It means that people who are not trading there. And we said that it's because cost of doing business is exorbitantly high at these ports.
I see.
And this is what is happening. Yes. Last year, 2021 to 2022, taxes have been piling on us.
Very well.
The VAT that used to be a flat rate of 3% have moved to about 22%. The benchmark reduction policy that used to mitigate on importation has also been reversed, meaning that duties have gone up over 30%.
I see.
So is it the time to add up again these taxes, and it's going to collapse our businesses? And I don't think IMF itself seek the businesses to collapse. I don't think the IMF program, that's what it seeks.
Very well. Now, let's just move the conversation now to Professor Mensah. Professor Mensah, you mentioned also earlier about the timing, which is something that Dr. Obeng has reiterated. But I want to look at what the impact could be on employment, because like he mentioned, some employers will be paying redundant taxes in the sense that they may be repeated. And then we also have the income tax component there. Could this have an impact on employment, and how much of it?
Yeah, it is expected that it will have impact on employment. It turns up that the cost of input to production goes up, then obviously you should expect, some part of, labor to be, sacrificed in a way to make up for the cost. So we are anticipating that with this increase in taxes, cost of inputs are going to go up, and therefore, labor in turn will be, will be affected. And when it happens like that, production will be cut. And of course, if production is cut, then obviously, a lot of people are going to be laid off, their works. So, it is anticipated. But like I said, it is a sacrifice we have to make in the intro to build up the economy. And in the end, when the economy picks up, it is anticipated that, jobs and all those are going to expand again. And therefore, they will start picking up, people that were laid off. So
I see.
For me, it's kind of economic transition that the country is going through. And that needs to be come with certain levels of sacrifice.
So, Professor Mensah, besides, raising the revenue, what other benefits could these new taxes or bills, benefit the Ghanaian economy?
Well, the benefit may not necessarily be immediate. I can say that as we speak now, we're waiting for the IMF program to come and inject certain, quantums of money into the economy. And at the same time, we're waiting for the IMF program to get certain financial discipline instilled in us. And we always know very well that anytime we go to IMF, it might not necessarily be the kind of money they give us, but we know very well that it's the financial discipline, which as a country, we don't have that kind of guts to have that financial discipline. So from where I sit, that kind of economic benefit is not an immediate term, but then we're looking at possibly 2 years to 3 years, way ahead to realize, the benefit. And the benefit must come with the financial discipline that IMF conditions comes with that, with the engagement that we have with them. I always say that anytime we engage IMF, we have what we call, hard benefit and then, a soft benefit. And I can tell you this increase in revenue is one of the, soft benefits that we can enjoy because if without the IMF program, government couldn't have gotten that political, will to increase, revenue through, the kind of taxes they are introducing now. So that is one of the soft benefits. But the hard benefit is the hard currencies that we're going to get from them, which is the 3 billion. But we should anticipate that in the next, 1 year to 2 years.
You talked about sacrifice. We know that prior to this, some other, taxes had come into the fray, including the e-levy. Someone would argue, haven't the Ghanaian people sacrificed enough? Professor Mensah, what would be your response to that?
I think my colleague, Professor Bokpin, did a presentation recently, which he talks about, tax efficiency. That is very, very important. You see, we should look at tax as an input to the economy. If the input is not generating, an output as expected, then the measurability of efficiency becomes a problem. What Ghana lacks is tax efficiency. That is why we hear analysts, we hear academics talk about, it's not about raising the tax, but then it's about the uses of the tax. That is where the problem is. So effectively, we may have problem of, increasing the taxes, but I think it's about time we look at the uses as well.
Professor Bokpin, again, let's take on tax efficiency. I've covered Ghana at least 10 years, and this is a conversation we have had for a very long time, and I'd like to believe even before the last decade. We've asked that the governments that come in to widen the nets, we've asked that they efficiently collect the taxes and use it even more effectively. Why do you think this conversation has not yielded any results up until now?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I think that it's the attitude of the Ghanaian and all of that contribute to this because it appears that our democracy, politicians get away with murder. They get away with everything. So we talk and then it ends there. So particularly if you look at this government, if you look at the size of the government, if you look at the level of corruption, of course, it cut across different regimes that we have experienced since 1992, it doesn't appear that the focus is to actually develop the country and ensure inclusive growth. It appears that politicians are in for themselves and their political parties, as Dr. Obin spoke about. Okay, so there are things we say more in words and practice less. We talk about private sector being the engine of growth, but really, I'm not too sure it's at the forefront of policy prescription. So those are the issues. And then also, I think the other dimension we need to look at as a country is we've seen multiplicity of taxes, tax handles here and there. In fact, since COVID came, the number of taxes that have been introduced, including e-levy that you mentioned, COVID-19 health levy, pollution and sanitation levy. We've also seen adjustment to the VAT base. We've seen the VAT rate increase. We've seen the street levies and all of that. But really, if you look at the impact of all these tax changes to revenue to GDP ratio, it hasn't increased significantly. And that tells you that it is possible that some of the tax handles are self-negating in one way or the other, right? And therefore, or probably the focus is to collect more from the faithful few. And when it happens that way, there may be conscious efforts through tax planning or avoidance or whatever to offset those burdens. And those are the things that we should look at. But overall, you're also looking at how you situate your tax policy to create the enabling environment, because Ghana is not an island. So whatever you are doing, you are looking at your neighboring countries, you are looking at your regional peers, you are looking at your structural peers, you are looking at your aspirational peers, and all of that, so that even as we move deeper into the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade, you do not undermine the competitiveness of your private sector. And I think now the point where we are, if you look at the incidence of the tax, even VAT, our VAT is the highest in Africa. Even though if you look at the standard VAT rate, you may think that it's 15%, and therefore it's not as high as other countries that have 18, 19, so. But simply, if you add the straight levies, okay, cumulatively, the effective incidence of that tax on the average consumer is more than 21%, right? So typically, when you get to that point, then you know that it's counterproductive in itself. Then you're also looking at the corporate tax rate. And here, I'm talking about the policy incoherence. At some point in this country, we decided that the corporate tax rate was too high. So we reduced it to 25%. Then we've used backdoors through banking sector recovery levy, through growth and sustainability levy, to effectively increase the corporate tax rate to above 35% for some companies. I think that is where the issue is, okay? So that backdoor approach of burdening businesses, when on one hand, we want to rather lessen the burden on them.
I see. Gentlemen, what we'll do is we'll take a quick break. When we return, let's talk a bit more about this tax efficiency, what the monies have been used for in the past, how far, how well the government has efficiently used its taxes, and whether or not, the Trader Association wouldn't mind sacrificing just a little bit more. We'll be right back. You're here on Village Square Africa on News Central TV. My name is Kemini Amano. We are discussing Ghana's new tax bills, and joining us on that discussion, Dr. Joseph Obin is president of the Ghana Union of Traders Association. We also have Professor Lord Mensah, a professor at the University of Ghana Business School. Earlier we had Professor Godwin Bokpin, but we lost him, Godfred Alufa Bokpin, I beg your pardon. We lost him briefly. We're hoping to get him back on the connection. But gentlemen, in the meantime, let's continue with the conversation. I want to bring it to your doorstep, Professor Mensah. On the subject of tax efficiency, how well do you think that the current administration has used the taxes that it has collected and imposed on the Ghanaian people?
Yeah, well, you see, government, we know very well that adopted, that kind of aggressive posture. And of course, we can deduce that from the president's inaugural speech. by indicating that, his government is in a hurry to solve, Ghanaian problems. And we all appreciate that as a result of, there's been in a hurry and adopting that kind of aggressive posture. They've done some, expenditure, that are not yielding back into the economy. We know very well we had some ministries that were created. As we speak now, some of these ministries which draw down, the budget over the first term of the administration, most of them we cannot pinpoint anything serious to that is building up back into the economy. If you take the government's usage of funds, I mean, clearly you come to understand that they are politically motivated. They're not being supported by any economic, measures. Then obviously, that government is, wasting the taxes that are being collected. So for me, I think it's about time we look at the economic benefits that we can gain from, usage of tax. I always look at, economy as a system that needs input and then an output that will come in. The expenditures that we do most of the time are the input to the economy. We expect that revenue will come out of this, expenditure. And that is same vein talking about the efficiency that we are looking at. But if you have a situation where we adopt, that kind of aggressive posture, dish out, expenditures that goes into areas that are unproductive, then you don't expect that, in the next line of your revenue generation, you can, generate much. That has been the problem of, the government over the years. And so for me, I can come out and say that there has been some, ministries that were created, some agencies that were created, some institutions that were created. And these institutions are sometimes duplication of existing structures.
Right.
And anytime you have more or less duplication of existing structures, the drawdown on expenditures becomes double. And for which at the end of the day, you end up having, part of these structures not being productive as expected. And this is the problem. And I can tell you that if we don't solve this problem, whatever new taxes we introduce, we will not use it as expected.
Very well. Dr. Obeng, some will say that perhaps, and like Professor Mensah has told us, maybe this might just be one other sacrificial step that, the association or members of the association will have to take so that government or Ghana in general can come out of its economic problems. What would you say to that?
Yeah, we've sacrificed enough in that just a few of us are paying these taxes. Ghana Revenue Authority, their own research tells us that 30 million Ghanaians have the capacity to pay taxes, and less than 5 million are captured into the tax net and paying the taxes. And these taxes are being recycled around these a few taxpayers. We cannot take it any longer. In any case, we are not doing badly in terms of tax payment. The last year, that businesses nearly collapsed. More businesses lost their capital, about 50% of their capitals and all that. We are able to exceed our tax revenue target that was set for Ghana Revenue Authority. The preceding years also saw that we are exceeding our revenue target. So if you are able to exceed your revenue target and you still demand from just a few of us and pile up the taxes on them, how fair are you?
Dr. Abe, who are you saying was, was exceeding their revenue targets? Which agency are you referring to? The Ghana Revenue Authority.
Yes, have been exceeding their revenue targets. So it means that you're not doing badly. So if you set a target of revenue and you get it and you exceed it, it means that you have to look at your expenditure. it means that you are overspending it. And then putting the burden on the poor businessman and the poor consuming public.
I see.
And this is what we are talking about.
I see. You mentioned earlier that you plan to petition the president. What are you going to tell the president in that petition?
Yeah, because we did not have any stakeholder engagement. That has been the norm. If they are going to introduce a new tax system, we all sit down on table and discuss, put it on the scale and see if it is not hurting businesses. And then the outcome we all adopt will build a consensus, and then Parliament will also pass it. This particular one, we did not do anything like that. And we are practicing democracy. We are not practicing democracy of imposition. And that's where our worry is. And that we should be respected and recognized. Because all the business community in the country, all the business organizations have petitioned the Parliament and giving government a pinch that if you continue to do this, and it's not that government have only this option to adopt. They can adopt alternative solutions rather than using these particular taxes.
Let's look at what those alternative solutions are. Professor Bokpin has joined us again. If the government wasn't going for, these taxes, what other options could be there for, the government of Ghana?
There's so much that we are paying if you adopt efficient.
Dr. Obin, that's for Professor Bokpin. Let's have Professor Bokpin take that.
Studies exist that the leakages in our revenue envelope is as much as how much we are able to collect. Okay, so we have to look at leakages in our revenue envelope, and then we also have to improve efficiency within the existing tax handles. I'll give you an example. Ghana's VAT rate at, let's say, 12.5% has an inefficiency gap of almost 3% of GDP. If you close that, and that translates to over $2 billion, right? So if you close that, in other words, through greater compliance and managing the exemptions around VAT, especially with politically connected businesses that actually don't pay the right duties and VAT and the rest of them, you would actually be raising more revenue from there than actually what these combined bills will bring in terms of just 4 billion cedis. Closing the VAT alone, you could get more than $1 billion. Okay, so it's about the approach that says that the goal is to inconvenience the private sector and the tax paying, whilst the future lies with making political parties and politically connected businesses and all of that have a sustainable future. I think the most important thing we need to consider as a country is whether we are managing the trade-off in terms of our tax policy objective, that the tax policy objective cannot be solely to raise revenue. You're also looking at how you can use the same tax policy as an enabling or an enabler to private sector competitiveness. So your desire to raise revenue, you have to balance that against business growth and sustainability, because that is the business that gives you the money in the first place. So if you kill the hen that lays the egg, where are you going to get the egg? I think that is the issue. So government is just going on a certain trajectory which says that we are only interested in the revenue. We are not interested in the consequences, the impact, and all of that. Look, we just went through a draconian domestic debt exchange. Whether you like it or not, that is another form of revenue mobilization from the same system. Okay, banks have to accommodate losses in excess of 41 billion cedis.
Very well.
In a single year. Okay, if you look at the liquidity gap from the banking sector alone, it's over 6 billion cedis. So if you look at all these dynamics, pick petroleum, ex-pump price, the taxes in there alone is more than 45%.
I see.
Okay, pick VAT. So at the end of the day, you are saying that manage the trade-off. that the goal with tax policy cannot solely and should not solely be to raise revenue. You're also looking at how you can use that to create private sector competitiveness that lays the egg, that gives the chicken, and all of that. That is where the job creation
So
will come from.
shouldn't we already know this? I mean, as a country, shouldn't
I am not sure. Government knows, but I'm not sure government wants to do the right thing.
I see.
Because if government is interested in doing the right thing, government will listen to private sector. Government will listen to businesses. Okay, it cannot be that I have power so I can do what I want to do and have my way through. No,
Very
that
well.
is not governance.
I see.
I think that's where we are getting it wrong.
I'll come back to you briefly if we have time, Professor Bokpin. But let me take it to Professor Mensah now. The Finance Ministry, on the other hand, prior to discussions in Parliament, had mentioned that if Parliament had failed to pass, those bills, the economy could experience some shocks. What was he talking about? What shocks could have happened?
Well, of course, the economy will experience a shock because we will not get the IMF program.
Right.
Yes, because, at the end of the day, the IMF gave us conditions for which, revenue, generation is one of them. So if we are not able to pass those, bills, then we wouldn't have gotten the IMF program. And in the end, it would have, or possibly delayed the IMF program. And that would have, been a problem for the country. So if the finance minister says the economy would have, received some shocks if they don't pass the bill, I mean, all that he means is that we may not get the IMF program.
I see.
Whatever the case may be, even our creditors, they should also see that as a country we are helping ourselves. And that is why, in a way, looking at a creditor perspective, you can say that, yes, indeed, if we don't do something about it, we may, the creditor may look at, the country as if we just want to, come for negotiation and use their money anyway, anyhow.
I see.
But then on the other hand, we should also appreciate that whatever the case may be, we just want to look good in the eyes of our external stakeholders. We are talking about, our creditors and then the IMF, so that we can get their interest and have a program with them.
I see. We already missed our deadline once. The government is projecting that by the end of April, we will have this $3 billion from the IMF. Is this feasible, Professor Mensah?
Well, the IMF, you see, I'm always skeptical when a politician sets a deadline. You see, the politician is always optimistic. If the president says we're going to get the IMF program by the end of March, we shouldn't have held on it and then say that we are likely to get, the program by the end of March. The president knows, the processes, the conditions that have been given to us, and especially when, you have to renegotiate with your creditors who are well dispersed globally, talking about Eurobond creditors, talking about, the Chinese bloc, talking about the Paris bloc. We are lucky. The Paris bloc, looking at the different countries in there, they form a bloc. So it makes the negotiation a bit easier. Other than that, would have even spent more to negotiate with the individual countries that form the bloc. So for me, the April again may not be, may be feasible. I'm looking at, yes, if April seems okay. By the end of April, we should be able to get, something, because all the conditions that they gave us, they're almost through with.
I see, gentlemen, we'll leave it here for now. Hopefully, we'll pick this conversation again at a better time. Maybe we'll have more money for Ghana by then. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insight on the subject matter.
You're welcome.
Now, it's clear that, the monies that will come in from that bill or from those bills that have been passed, and even the IMF bailout alone, will not solve Ghana's problem in the long term. It's important that the government continues to take pragmatic steps that will ensure that, the economy is properly oiled for a very long time, and in the long term will have great benefits for the Ghanaian people. I am Kemini Amano. That'll be all for today. I'll see you same time tomorrow here on The Square. Bye-bye.